In the merciless heart of the Mojave Desert, where men learn to survive by forgetting how to feel, rancher Jack Mercer found something that would shatter his carefully constructed silence. A young woman stood by his fence, barefoot, bound a burlap sack covering her head like an executioner's hood. When she whispered those four words, "Please take them off," he didn't know he was about to uncover 19 years of unspeakable cruelty. This is that story. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The sun didn't just shine in the Mojave Desert in July, it punished. It beat down on the cracked earth with the kind of relentless fury that made men question their choices, their sanity, and sometimes their will to draw another breath. Jack Mercer had stopped questioning anything 3 years ago. Questions required hope, and hope was a luxury he'd buried alongside his wife and daughter. His ranch sat like a defiant scar on the landscape-weathered wood-rusted wire and dust that had become part of the architecture itself. 47 acres of stubborn survival where mesquite trees twisted like arthritic fingers reaching for a sky that offered nothing but heat. Jack had inherited the land from his father, who'd inherited it from his father before him. Each generation passing down the same bitter legacy: this land would break you, but it was yours to be broken on. Jack was mending a section of fence when he first saw her. At first he thought it was a mirage. The desert played those tricks when the heat shimmer rose off the ground like water that would never quench your thirst. But mirages didn't cast shadows, and this shadow was real, standing perfectly still about 50 yards from his eastern fence line. He squinted against the glare, his calloused hand shading his eyes. The figure didn't move, didn't call out, just stood there like a marker someone had planted in the sand. Jack's gut tightened, that old instinct that had kept him alive through range wars and rattlesnake encounters. Something was wrong. Everything about that motionless figure screamed wrong. He set down his wire cutters and started walking, his boots crunching on ground so dry it had forgotten what water tasted like. As he got closer, details emerged that made his stomach turn cold despite the 108-degree heat. It was a woman young, he could tell by her frame. But her wrists were bound in front of her with rough hemp rope, the kind that left burns. Her feet were bare, already reddening from the scorching earth, and over her head, tied tight around her neck, was a burlap sack. "Christ almighty," Jack breathed. She didn't turn toward his voice, didn't acknowledge his presence at all. She just stood there swaying slightly like a tree that had forgotten how to fall. "Miss?" Jack's voice came out rough from disuse. He hadn't spoken to another soul in near on 2 weeks. "Miss, can you hear me?" A slight tilt of her head. That was all. Jack closed the distance carefully, the way he'd approach a wounded animal. "I'm going to come closer now. I ain't going to hurt you." When he was within arm's reach, he could hear her breathing quick, shallow breaths that spoke of panic barely contained. The burlap sack moved slightly with each exhale. "Who did this to you?" Jack asked, his eyes scanning the horizon. Empty. Nothing but heat waves and Joshua trees standing like silent witnesses. The woman's voice came muffled through the sack, so quiet he almost missed it. "Please." Jack leaned in. "What's that? Please, take them off." 4 words, 4 simple words that carried the weight of something Jack couldn't yet name. Not desperation, he'd heard desperation before. This was something deeper. Resignation, maybe, or the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting too long against the inevitable. "The sack or the ropes?" Jack asked. "Both." A pause. "But the sack first. Please, I can't breathe right." Jack's hands went to the rope around her neck, and he noticed his fingers were shaking. He couldn't remember the last time his hands had shaken. The knot was tight, professional. Whoever tied it knew their business. It took him nearly a minute to work it loose, and all the while the woman stood perfectly still, as if any movement might shatter her completely. When the rope finally gave way, Jack lifted the burlap sack slowly, almost afraid of what he'd find underneath. The face that emerged made him take an involuntary step back. Not because she was cursed or marked or any of the things people whispered about in these parts when something didn't fit their narrow understanding of the world, but because she was achingly, devastatingly human. Young couldn't be more than 19 or 20, dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, eyes that held the kind of knowledge no one that young should possess. Deep brown eyes that had seen things, terrible things, and had somehow survived them. But it was the scars that made Jack's blood run cold. Thin white lines crisscrossed her cheeks like a map of suffering. Burns on her neck, old ones healed but permanent. And when she finally looked at him, really looked at him, he saw something in those eyes that he recognized because he'd seen it in his own mirror. This was someone who'd made peace with dying. "What's your name?" Jack asked softly. She blinked slowly as if the question was in a foreign language she had to translate. "They called me different things. What do you call yourself?" She swayed and Jack reached out to steady her. She flinched at his touch but didn't pull away. "I don't remember anyone asking me that before." Jack looked down at her bound wrists. The rope had cut into her skin, leaving raw, angry marks. "Let me get these off you." As he worked the knots, he asked, "How long you been standing out here?" "Since sunrise." Jack glanced at the sun. It was past noon now. 6 hours, maybe more, standing in this heat with a sack over her head. "Why didn't you walk, try to find help?" "They said if I moved, they'd know. They'd come back and make it worse." Her voice was flat matter of fact. "They said a lot of things." The ropes came loose and she brought her hands to her chest, rubbing her wrists. Jack noticed her fingers' delicate but strong nails broken and dirty. "Who's they?" Jack asked. She looked past him toward the horizon. "The men who own me." "Nobody owns people anymore. That ended 60 years ago." A bitter smile crossed her face, the first expression he'd seen from her that held any life at all. "Tell that to the men who bought me. Tell that to the preacher who blessed the transaction. Tell that to the 12 families who passed me around like I was livestock." Jack felt something shift in his chest, that old anger he'd thought he'd buried with everything else. "Come on," he said, his voice rough. "You need water, shade. Then we'll figure out the rest." She didn't move. Why what? Why would you help me? You don't know me. For all you know, everything they said about me is true." "What did they say?" She looked at him directly. Now and Jack saw something flicker in those dark eyes. Not hope exactly, but maybe the memory of what hope used to feel like. "They said I was cursed, that I killed my mother being born, that I brought drought wherever I went, that any man who looked at me too long would lose his mind, his fortune, his soul." She paused. "They said I was the devil's daughter wrapped in human skin." Jack studied her for a long moment. The sun beat down on both of them, relentless and impartial. "Well," he said finally, "I've been looking at you for a good 10 minutes now, and I ain't lost nothing yet except my patience with whoever did this to you." Something happened to her face, then a crack in that careful mask she wore. Her lips trembled slightly, and for a moment Jack thought she might cry. But she didn't. Instead, she laughed, a short, sharp sound that held more pain than any tears could have carried. "What's funny?" Jack asked. "Nothing. Everything." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I can't remember the last time someone talked to me like I was a person." "Come on," Jack said again, softer this time. He started walking toward his ranch house, then stopped when he realized she wasn't following. He turned back. "You coming or not?" She looked at him, then at the ground, then back at the horizon where her captors had disappeared. "If I go with you, they'll come for me." "Let them come." "You don't understand. These aren't ordinary men. They have money, connections. They'll bring the law or something worse than the law." Jack's jaw tightened. "Miss, I don't know what you've been through, and I ain't going to pretend I understand it all. But I know this: you stand out here much longer, this heat's going to kill you. And I'll be damned if I let that happen on my land. So you got a choice. Come with me now or stay here and die. But know that if you stay, I'm going to stand right here with you and we'll both die, and that'll be a waste of a perfectly good afternoon." She stared at him like he'd spoken in tongues. "You're serious?" "As a heart attack. Why would you die for a stranger? Ain't about dying for you. It's about living with myself after. I already got enough ghosts keeping me company at night. Don't need yours added to the collection." She studied his face, searching for something deception maybe, or ulterior motive. Whatever she was looking for, she must not have found it, because after a long moment she took a tentative step forward. Then another. Her bare feet left small prints in the dust, like she was barely there at all. They walked in silence toward the ranch house, Jack shortening his stride to match hers. She moved slowly, each step deliberate, as if her body was remembering how to make decisions for itself. "You got a name you want me to call you?" Jack asked as they approached the porch. "Sarah," she said quietly. I think my mother called me Sarah. Before." "Before what?" "Before they told me names were for people and I wasn't people anymore." Jack stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. The old wood creaked under his weight as he turned to face her. "Well, Sarah, I'm Jack Mercer. This is my ranch. Ain't much, just me and about 40 acres of dust. But it's home, and you're welcome to it for as long as you need." Sarah looked up at the house, a simple structure, weathered but solid, with a covered porch that offered the promise of shade. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing." "Everyone wants something." "Then I guess I ain't everyone." Jack opened the door. "Come on, let's get you out of this heat." The interior of the house was dim and blessedly cool. Jack kept the curtains drawn during the day to hold the temperature down. The main room was sparse, a table, 2 chairs, a wood stove in the corner. Everything a man needed and nothing he didn't. Sarah stood just inside the doorway, as if crossing the threshold required permission she wasn't sure she had. "Sit," Jack said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "I'll get water." He went to the kitchen, really just an alcove with a counter and a pump, and worked the handle until water splashed into a tin cup. When he turned around, Sarah was still standing by the door. "The chair ain't gonna bite you," Jack said. "I'm dirty. I'll ruin it." "It's a chair, not a church pew. Sit." Slowly, carefully, Sarah lowered herself into the chair. She sat on the very edge, back straight, hands folded in her lap, the posture of someone who'd learned that taking up space was a punishable offense. Jack set the cup in front of her. "Drink slow. You chug it in this heat, you'll just bring it back up." Sarah reached for the cup with both hands, holding it like it was precious. She took a small sip, then another, her eyes closing briefly. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack pulled out the other chair and sat down, studying her in the better light. The scars were more visible now, not just on her face and neck, but on her arms too. Some looked like burns, others like cuts. There was a pattern to them, almost deliberate, like someone had taken their time. "When did you eat last?" Jack asked. Sarah thought about it. "Yesterday morning, some bread." Jack stood and went to the stove, where a pot of yesterday's beans sat cold. He didn't bother heating them. She needed food in her more than she needed it warm. He spooned some into a bowl, grabbed half a potato from his meager supplies, and set both in front of her. "It ain't fancy," he said. Sarah looked at the food like it was a trap. This is too much. It's beans and half a potato. But it's yours. And I'm giving it to you. That's how food works." She picked up the spoon with trembling fingers. The first bite seemed to take all her concentration. Then the second. By the third, tears were streaming down her face, though she made no sound. Jack looked away, giving her what privacy he could in the small space. He'd seen men cry before hell. He'd done his share of it. But there was something about watching this young woman weep over a bowl of beans that cut him deeper than he'd expected. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. I'm not usually—" "Don't apologize. Eat." They sat in silence while Sarah finished the food. Jack noticed she ate slowly, deliberately, like someone who'd learned to make every bite count. When she was done, she set the spoon down carefully and looked at him. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you rest. Then we figure out what comes next." "They'll come for me." "You said that already." "I need you to understand they won't just take me. They'll hurt you too. Make an example. They always do." Jack leaned back in his chair. "How many are there?" "The men who had me 12 families, but they work for someone else. Someone with real power." "Got a name?" Sarah's face went pale. "You don't say his name out loud. Not unless you want him to hear you. That's superstition." "Is it?" Sarah's eyes were hard now. "You think I got these scars from superstition. You think I stood in that desert for 6 hours because of superstition." Jack held up his hands. "All right. We don't need names, just need to know what we're dealing with. You're dealing with men who believe they can do whatever they want to people like me. And so far they've been right. Well, Jack said, standing up. Maybe it's time they were wrong. He went to the corner of the room where he kept his shotgun, a Winchester Model 1887 that had belonged to his father. He checked the load, then set it against the wall near the door. Sarah watched him with those two knowing eyes. You think that'll be enough? No, Jack said honestly. But it's a start. Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything. Jack was quiet for a moment, thinking about the question. Why was he doing this? 3 years ago, he'd decided the world could burn for all he cared. He'd built walls around himself as solid as the fence around his property. He'd chosen silence and solitude because feeling anything else hurt too much. But looking at this young woman, this stranger, who'd been used and broken and discarded like she was nothing, something in those walls had cracked. I had a daughter once, Jack said finally. She'd be about your age now if she'd lived. And I like to think if she was in trouble, if she was scared and alone, someone would have helped her, even if it cost them, especially if it cost them. Sarah's expression softened. What happened to her? Fire. 3 years ago. Took her and my wife both. Jack's voice was steady, but his hands clenched at his sides. I was in town buying supplies. By the time I got back, there was nothing left but ash and what-ifs. I'm sorry. Don't be. Just rest now. There's a room in the back bed's probably dusty, but it's better than the floor. Sarah stood slowly testing her legs. Mr. Mercer. Jack. Jack, she corrected. If they come when they come, you should let them take me. It's not worth dying for someone like me. Jack looked at her. Really looked at her, and saw what he'd been seeing in his own reflection for 3 years, someone who'd forgotten they were worth saving. Miss Sarah, he said quietly. I've been dying slow for 3 years now. If I gotta go, might as well be for something that matters. Now go lie down before you fall down. Sarah nodded and moved toward the back room. At the doorway, she paused. Jack. Yeah. Those things they said about me about being cursed, bringing bad luck, what if they're true? Jack met her eyes. Then I guess I'm already cursed, so you can't make it any worse. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Thank you. After she disappeared into the back room, Jack sat at the table and stared at the empty bowl. Outside, the desert sun continued its relentless assault on the world. Inside, something had shifted. A weight he'd been carrying had redistributed itself, settled into new positions. He thought about the men who would come, because they would come. Sarah was right about that. Men like that always did. They didn't like losing their property, and they especially didn't like being defied. Jack stood and went to the window, looking out at the empty landscape. In the distance, heat waves made the horizon shimmer like water. But he wasn't looking at the horizon. He was looking at the dust, watching for the telltale signs of riders. Let them come, he thought. Let them all come. He'd been dead inside for 3 years. Maybe it was time to find out if there was anything left worth fighting for. In the back room, Sarah lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The mattress was thin and the pillow flat, but it was the softest thing she'd touched in months. Years, maybe. She tried to remember the last time someone had shown her kindness without expecting something in return and came up empty. Her wrists throbbed where the ropes had cut into them. Her feet burned from the hot ground. Her head ached from dehydration and fear and the constant grinding weight of survival. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something else too. Hope. It was a dangerous feeling. Hope was what got you hurt. Hope was what made you believe things could change, could get better, and then reality crushed you all over again. She'd learned to live without it, learned to expect nothing, and thereby avoid disappointment. But Jack Mercer, this quiet, broken rancher who'd taken her in without question, had cracked something open inside her, something she thought had died long ago. She closed her eyes and tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she listened to the sounds of the house, Jack's footsteps, the creak of his chair, the distant call of a hawk outside. And underneath it all, she heard what he couldn't yet hear, the sound of hoofbeats still miles away but coming closer. The sound of men who didn't know the meaning of mercy. The sound of her past riding hard toward this fragile moment of peace. Sarah opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling again. They would come. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. But they would come. And when they did, this brief sanctuary would shatter like glass. She should leave. Walk out into the desert, lead them away from this man who'd shown her kindness. It would be the right thing to do, the smart thing. But God help her, she was tired of running, tired of being nothing, tired of accepting cruelty as the only constant in her life. If they came for her when they came, she wouldn't hide. She wouldn't cower. She'd stand in the light and face them, and if that meant Jack Mercer stood beside her, then maybe, just maybe, she was worth standing beside. Outside, the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The desert cooled by degrees, though the heat still radiated from the ground like a living thing. And in the distance, too far for human ears to hear, the sound of hoofbeats grew louder. The hunters were coming. The night came fast to the Mojave the way it always did. One moment the sky was bleeding orange and red, the next it was black as a mine shaft. Jack lit a kerosene lamp in the main room and set it on the table, its weak light pushing back the darkness just enough to see by. Sarah emerged from the back room moving like a ghost, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. She'd washed her face with water from the basin he'd left her, and her dark hair was pulled back, revealing the full extent of the scars on her neck. "Couldn't sleep?" Jack asked. "Sleep feels dangerous." She stood in the doorway, neither in the room nor out of it. "Like, if I close my eyes, I'll wake up back there." "Back where?" Sarah moved to the window, careful to stand to the side where she could see out without being seen. "The compound, that's what they called it. 20 miles south of here, near the border. Looked like a ranch from the outside corral's barn bunkhouse, but underneath—" She trailed off her fingers, touching the window frame. "There were rooms underground. That's where they kept us." Jack felt his jaw tighten. "Us. There were 6 of us when I arrived. Girls mostly, some boys. We were the ones nobody would miss, orphans, runaways, children of women who died in childbirth, and fathers who couldn't afford another mouth to feed." Her voice was steady, almost clinical, like she was describing something that had happened to someone else. "They told the families they were taking us to work as servants, promised good wages, regular meals, a roof over our heads. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was we were livestock, bought and sold between families who believed we carried their bad luck, their sins, their curses. They'd keep us for a while, work us, beat us, then trade us to the next family. When they got bored or scared, we'd bring them misfortune." Sarah's breath fogged the glass. "I was passed around 12 times in 4 years. Each family worse than the last." Jack stood and moved to the stove, more for something to do with his hands than any need for coffee. "The others, the ones who were with you, where are they now?" "Gone. Some died, some disappeared. I was the last one left when they brought me out here 3 days ago." She turned to face him, and the lamplight caught her eyes, making them gleam like dark water. "They said this was my final test. Said if I could stand in the desert from sunrise to sunset without dying, it would prove I wasn't cursed. Then they'd let me go." "You believed them?" "No." A bitter smile crossed her face. "But I stood there anyway because the alternative was going back underground, and I'd rather die in the sun than live in that darkness." Jack poured water into the coffee pot, his movements deliberate. "These families, they got names. The Hardings, the Bishops, the Kellers, those were the main ones. But they all answered to the same man. Everyone called him the Shepherd." She said the name like it tasted of poison. "He's the one who runs everything, the one who decides who gets traded where, who lives, who dies. This Shepherd, he got a real name." Sarah shook her head. "If he does, nobody uses it. They say he came out here 20 years ago with nothing but a Bible and a wagon full of gold. Built the compound, started buying up land, gathering followers, people who believed in his version of God, a God who demanded payment for sins, who required suffering to earn redemption. That ain't God. That's just cruelty with scripture painted on it. Tell that to the 200 people who follow him." Sarah moved away from the window and sat at the table, her hands folded in front of her. "They believe he's a prophet, that he can see into people's souls, identify the cursed ones, the damned ones. And they believe that by punishing us, they're doing God's work." Jack set the coffee pot on the stove, though the fire was cold. His mind was working through the problem like he would a broken fence line, identifying the weak points, figuring out where to apply pressure. You said they brought you out here 3 days ago. Why here? Why my land? I don't know. They blindfolded me for most of the ride, but I heard them talking something about this being far enough from prying eyes and close enough to watch. She looked at him directly. I think they expected me to die. The heat, the exposure, the dehydration. They thought it would kill me, and they could claim it was God's judgment. But you didn't die. No, I stood there and I waited, and I didn't die. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. And then you came. Jack was quiet for a moment, thinking about timing, about chance, about the thin line between life and death. If he'd mended that fence yesterday instead of today, if he'd worked a different section of the property, if he'd decided to stay inside out of the heat, Sarah would have died alone in his pasture, and he'd have found her body eventually, another mystery the desert claimed. They'll come looking, Sarah said, breaking the silence. They always do. They can't afford to lose their property, and they especially can't afford to have someone know what they're doing. How many are there at this compound of yours? Armed men, maybe 20. But it's not just the numbers, it's who they are. Ex-soldiers, outlaws, men with nowhere else to go and nothing to lose. The shepherd takes them in, gives them purpose, makes them believe they're righteous, makes them dangerous. Jack moved to his gun cabinet and pulled out a Henry rifle, checking the action. You know how to shoot? Sarah stared at the weapon like it was a snake. No, we weren't allowed near weapons. Might be you'll need to learn. He set the rifle on the table. If they come. When they come, Sarah corrected. When they come, Jack acknowledged. I can't be everywhere at once. You're going to need to protect yourself. I won't kill anyone. Even if they're trying to kill you. Sarah's hands trembled slightly. I've been beaten, burned, starved, and worse things I don't have words for, but I never hurt anyone back. If I start killing, even in self-defense, I become what they said I was. I become the monster. Jack studied her face, seeing the iron underneath the scars. There's a difference between being a monster and refusing to be a victim. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, violence just breeds more violence. I've seen it. The girl who fought back got locked in the box for 3 weeks. The boy who tried to run got dragged behind a horse until she stopped swallowing hard. No, I won't do it. Before Jack could respond, a sound cut through the night, distant but distinct. Hoofbeats. Sarah's face went pale. They're here. Jack moved to the window, blowing out the lamp as he passed. The darkness swallowed the room, broken only by starlight filtering through the curtains. He peered out carefully, scanning the landscape. At first he saw nothing, then movement, 2 riders approaching from the south, moving at a steady pace. Not rushing, but not dawdling either. Men who knew where they were going and what they'd find when they got there. Stay back from the windows, Jack said quietly. He grabbed the shotgun and moved to the door, opening it just enough to slip through onto the porch. The night air was cooling rapidly the way it did in the desert. Above, stars scattered across the sky like thrown dice. Jack stood in the shadows of the porch, overhang, the shotgun held loose but ready. The riders pulled up about 20 yards from the house. In the starlight, Jack could make out their silhouettes, both big men sitting tall in their saddles. They were dressed too well for ranch hands, their clothes dark and clean, even after a ride through the desert. That's far enough, Jack called out. The rider on the left raised his hands slowly, showing they were empty. We're not here for trouble, friend. Then you took a wrong turn. Ain't nothing out here but trouble and me, and I ain't feeling friendly. The second rider leaned forward in his saddle. We're looking for something that belongs to us. A girl. Young, dark hair, scarred up pretty bad. She was left out here as a test, but seems she's gone missing. Can't help you. Now we know she didn't just walk away. This desert would have killed her by now. So either you found her body or you found her alive. The first rider's voice was smooth, practiced. We just want to collect what's ours and be on our way. No need for this to get complicated. Jack's finger rested near the trigger guard. I told you can't help you. Now you're trespassing on my land and I'm within my rights to defend my property. So I'm going to count to 10, and if you're still here when I'm done, we're going to have a different kind of conversation. The riders exchanged a look. The second one spoke up, his voice harder than his partner's. You're making a mistake. Won't be my first. 1. We got the law on our side. the first rider said. The shepherd has connections. Sheriff Judge, half the county officials. You help this girl, you're interfering with a lawful transaction. 2. She's cursed old man. Everyone knows it. Her mother died birthing her, and she's brought nothing but misery everywhere she's been. You keep her here, that misery becomes yours. 3. The second rider's hand drifted toward his hip. Jack saw the movement and raised the shotgun in one smooth motion, the barrel catching starlight. I wouldn't, Jack said quietly. The rider froze. For a long moment nobody moved. Then slowly the first rider lowered his hands and gathered his reins. This isn't over, he said. I expect not. 4, 5, 6. The riders turned their horses and started back the way they'd come, not rushing but not lingering either. Jack watched until they disappeared into the darkness, then watched some more, counting slowly to himself. When he hit 100, he lowered the shotgun and went back inside. Sarah was standing in the main room, her back against the wall, breathing hard. They're gone. For now. They'll come back with more men. I know. Jack set the shotgun by the door and relit the lamp. In its warm glow, Sarah looked younger, somehow more vulnerable. How long you figure we got? They'll report to the shepherd first. He'll want to decide how to handle this. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. Tomorrow night maybe, or the night after, but they'll come in force next time. Jack moved to the kitchen and finally lit the fire under the coffee pot. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing. 2 men tonight, but next time it could be 10, 20. He was a good shot, knew this land better than anyone, but numbers had a way of overwhelming even the best advantages. You should let me go, Sarah said. Walk out there, give myself up. They'll take me and you'll be safe. Already told you no. But no. Jack's voice was firm. You want to make your own choices, that's fine. But you don't get to make mine. And I choose to stand. Sarah's eyes glistened in the lamplight. Why, I'm nobody, nothing, just a cursed girl who's brought you nothing but trouble. Jack turned to face her fully. You know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who stood in the desert sun for 6 hours because the alternative was worse. I see someone who survived things that would have broken most people. I see someone who refuses to become what others say she is. He paused. That ain't nothing, Sarah. That's everything. She looked away, blinking rapidly. Those pretty words don't change facts. I'm still what they say I am. And what's that exactly, cursed because you were born and your mother died? Jack shook his head. My daughter died in a fire. Does that mean fire is cursed? Or does it just mean terrible things happen and we look for someone to blame? It's not the same. Isn't it? Seems to me people are mighty quick to call something a curse when they don't understand it, or when they need an excuse for their own cruelty. The coffee started to boil, and Jack poured 2 cups, sliding one across the table to Sarah. Sit down, drink, then you're going to tell me everything about this shepherd and his operation. Because if we're going to fight smart. Sarah sat slowly, wrapping her hands around the tin cup. The warmth seemed to steady her. What do you want to know? Everything. Start with the compound. Lay out guards' routines, where they keep weapons, where they sleep, how many ways in and out. You're planning an attack. I'm planning for possibilities. Jack sat across from her, his own coffee untouched. Knowledge is a weapon, same as a gun. More reliable sometimes. Sarah took a sip of coffee and began to talk. She described the compound in detail, a main house where the shepherd lived, a bunkhouse for the men, a barn that had been converted into a church of sorts, and beneath it all, the underground rooms where she and the others had been kept. The entrance to the underground is in the barn, she said, hidden beneath a false floor in the feed room. Wooden stairs leading down to a corridor maybe 50 feet long, doors on either side, that's where the cells are. At the end of the corridor there's a larger room. That's where the shepherd conducts his ceremonies. Ceremonies. Sarah's grip on the cup tightened. Purification rituals, he calls them. Everyone gathers, the families, the followers, everyone, and he brings out one of us. Makes us stand in the center while he reads scripture, talks about sin and redemption. Then she stopped, her jaw working. They punish us. Fire water blades depends on the sin he says we carry. It's supposed to purify us, wash away the curse. All it does is add more scars. Jack felt a cold rage building in his chest. How often? Once a month, full moon. The shepherd says that's when the veil between the righteous and the damned is thinnest. She laughed a broken sound. A lot of superstition for a man who claims to speak for God. When's the next full moon? Sarah thought for a moment. 3 days? Maybe 4. So he'll want you back before then. You're part of his show, and he can't perform without his props. Jack stood and began pacing the floorboards, creaking under his boots. He'll come himself, most likely. Want to make it personal? Make it a lesson. He doesn't leave the compound often. Too many threats out in the world, he says. Too many sinners waiting to corrupt the righteous. But he'll come for you. Because losing you isn't just about property, it's about control. He can't afford to let word spread that someone escaped, that someone defied him and lived. Sarah set down her cup. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we got 3, maybe 4 days before this comes to a head. I'm thinking we need help, but everyone around here is either scared of the shepherd or in his pocket. Jack stopped pacing and looked at her. I'm thinking we might need to make some noise. Get attention from people who aren't scared, who can't be bought. Like who? Federal marshals, maybe. This sounds like more than local law can handle or will handle, given what you said about the shepherd's connections. Sarah shook her head. You think they'll believe me? A scarred-up girl with no family, no proof, nothing but stories about underground rooms and rituals. The shepherd has documentation for all of us bills of sale contracts signed by our families. In the eyes of the law, we're indentured servants working off debts, completely legal. Slavery's been illegal for 60 years. Tell that to the judge who signed off on my indenture papers. Tell that to the sheriff who delivers runaways back to the compound. Sarah's voice was bitter. The shepherd didn't build his empire by being stupid. He built it by making everything look legitimate. By the time anyone realizes what's really happening, they're either part of it or too scared to speak up. Jack sat back down, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. She was right, going to the authorities might just make things worse. But doing nothing wasn't an option either. All right, Tip, he said finally. Then we don't go to them. We make them come to us. How? By making sure that when the shepherd comes for you, it's not quiet, not hidden. We make it loud, public, impossible to ignore. Jack's mind was working now, piecing together a plan. The shepherd relies on fear and secrecy. We take that away from him. Sarah looked skeptical. You're talking about using me as bait. I'm talking about standing our ground and making sure everyone knows about it. The riders who came tonight, they'll report back, tell the shepherd you're here. When he comes, it won't be subtle. He'll bring men weapons, maybe even some of his followers. Make it a show of force. Exactly. So we die. Or we make enough noise that the whole county shows up to watch. Hard to disappear someone when you've got witnesses. Jack leaned forward. There's a town called Ridgecrest, about 15 miles north. Not big, but big enough. People there ain't all under the shepherd's thumb. Some of them might even help if they knew what was really going on. And how do you plan to tell them ride into town and start making speeches about underground prisons and curses? They'll think you're crazy. Maybe. Or maybe there's folks there who've already heard whispers, seen things that didn't sit right. Sometimes all people need is someone to say out loud what they've been thinking in private. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. When she spoke, her voice was soft. You'd risk everything. Your life, your home, your peace, for someone you just met. Someone who might actually be cursed. Already told you. I know what you told me, but I need you to understand what you're really doing. If you stand with me, if you fight this fight, there's no going back. Even if we win, even if we survive your life, here is over. The shepherd's followers won't forget. They won't forgive. You'll always be looking over your shoulder, always waiting for revenge. Jack looked at her, this young woman who'd been beaten and broken, but somehow remained undefeated. He thought about his wife, his daughter, the fire that had taken them. He thought about the 3 years he'd spent dying, slowly going through the motions of living without actually being alive. Miss Sarah, he said quietly, I've been dead for 3 years. Way I see it, I got nothing to lose and everything to gain, because for the first time since I lost my family, I feel like I'm doing something that matters. So yeah, I'll risk it all, gladly. Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, but she smiled through them. You're either the bravest man I've ever met, or the craziest? Can it be both? She laughed a real laugh this time, not bitter or broken, but genuine. It transformed her face, made her look her age for the first time. I suppose it can. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking their coffee, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the desert night was alive with small sounds, crickets, the distant howl of a coyote, the whisper of wind through sagebrush. Finally, Sarah spoke. If we're really doing this, I need to tell you something. About the shepherd. About why he's so dangerous. I'm listening? He doesn't just control people through fear. He controls them through belief. He's convinced them that what he's doing is holy, that the suffering he causes is necessary for salvation. And when people believe they're doing God's work, there's no limit to the cruelty they'll justify. Jack nodded slowly. I've seen that before. During the war, men who killed in God's name slept better than those who killed for country or money. The shepherd takes it further. He's built an entire theology around it. Says that some souls are born damned, marked by original sin, so deep that only extreme purification can save them, and that it's the duty of the righteous to provide that purification, no matter how painful. Sarah's voice dropped. He preaches that mercy to the cursed is cruelty to the righteous, that saving us from suffering is the same as condemning everyone else. That's twisted. That's power. He's created a system where hurting us makes his followers feel holy, where our pain is their proof of righteousness. It's perfect in its own terrible way. Self-sustaining. Every scream, every scar, every death just reinforces their belief that they're the chosen ones. Jack felt sick. How many has he killed? I don't know. The underground rooms there are scratches on the walls. Names, dates, last words. Dozens of them. Maybe more. Sarah's hands trembled. We used to read them at night when the guards were asleep, trying to remember them, honor them somehow. Proof that we existed, that we mattered. You matter, Sarah. Don't ever doubt that. She wiped her eyes. Thank you. For saying that. For meaning it. They talked through the night, planning, preparing. Jack learned the names of the shepherd's lieutenants, the layout of his property, the routines of his guards. Sarah learned how to load a rifle, how to aim, how to breathe through the fear. She still refused to promise she'd shoot, but at least now she knew how. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, Jack stood and stretched. You should rest. Real rest, not just lying awake waiting for ghosts. What about you? I'll keep watch. Someone needs to. Sarah stood too, moving closer. Jack, She stopped searching for words. I don't know how to thank you. Then don't. Just survive. That'll be thanks enough. She nodded and headed toward the back room. At the doorway, she paused. Jack, those things they said about me. About being cursed bringing bad luck. What if they're right? What if just by helping me you've doomed yourself? Jack thought about it. Really thought about it. Then he smiled, the first genuine smile he'd managed in 3 years. Then I guess we'll be doomed together. And there's worse company to keep. Sarah smiled back, and for a moment the weight of the world seemed lighter. But as she disappeared into the back room and Jack settled into his chair by the window, shotgun across his lap, he knew the hardest part was still ahead. The shepherd would come, and when he did, it wouldn't be a conversation. It would be a reckoning. Jack watched the sun rise over the Mojave, painting the desert in gold and shadow. He thought about his daughter, about second chances, about the thin line between cowardice and courage. Somewhere out there, men were preparing to come for Sarah to reclaim what they believed was theirs. Let them come, he thought. Let them all come. Because, for the first time in 3 years, Jack Mercer had something worth protecting. And he'd be damned if he'd let it slip through his fingers without a fight. The desert wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of sage and creosote. Jack breathed it in, feeling alive in a way he'd forgotten was possible. Whatever came next, whatever price he'd have to pay, it was worth it. Sarah was worth it, and maybe, just maybe, so was he. The second day passed in tense preparation. Jack showed Sarah how to bar the doors from the inside, where to hide if shooting started, which windows offered the best vantage points. She absorbed it all with quiet intensity, asking questions that showed she was thinking tactically, despite her refusal to use violence herself. If they come from the east, she said, pointing through the window, the sun will be at their backs in the morning. We'll be blind. Good eye, Jack acknowledged. That's why we'll close the eastern shutters at dawn, force them to come from the west or circle around. And if they split up, come from multiple directions, then we've got problems. Jack checked the loads in his rifles for the third time that hour. But most men don't think that complicated when they're angry. They'll come straight on trying to overwhelm us with numbers. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Have you killed men before?" The question hung in the air between them. Jack set down the rifle and looked at her directly. Yes. In the war, during and after, the war didn't end just because Lee surrendered. It took years for some folks to get the message. He paused, memories flickering across his face like shadows. I killed when I had to, when there was no other choice. Never enjoyed it, never forgot it either. Does it change you? Taking a life. Everything changes you. Living changes you. Dying would change you if you stuck around to feel it. Jack picked up the rifle again, his hands moving with practiced ease. But killing that leaves a mark. Not the kind you can see, but it's there. You carry those men with you whether you want to or not. Sarah touched the scars on her neck unconsciously. I carry marks I didn't put there. Sometimes I think that's worse, being marked by someone else's cruelty instead of your own choices. Ain't worse, just different. Jack met her eyes. Your scars tell a story of survival. Mine tell a story of necessity. Neither of us should be ashamed. Before Sarah could respond, the sound of hoofbeats reached them. Multiple horses this time, moving fast. Jack was at the window in an instant, rifle in hand. Sarah pressed herself against the wall beside him, peering out carefully. 5 riders this time, approaching from the south in a tight formation. The sun was high overhead, turning the desert into a furnace, but these men rode like the heat was nothing to them. As they drew closer, Jack could make out more details, all armed, all wearing similar dark clothing, and at their head rode a man who sat his horse like he owned the world. That's Grant Teller, Sarah whispered, her voice tight with fear. The shepherd's right hand. If he's here, this is serious. Jack studied the lead rider. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked carved from granite. He rode with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a fight, never been told no, and had it stick. The rider stopped about 30 yards from the house, the same distance the first 2 had maintained. But unlike the first 2, these men didn't try to hide their weapons. Rifles rested across their saddles. Pistols sat in easy reach. This wasn't a conversation. It was a show of force. Grant Teller dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate. The other 4 stayed mounted, hands near their guns. Grant walked forward until he was about 20 yards from the porch, then stopped. Jack Mercer, he called out, his voice deep and carrying. We need to talk. Jack stepped out onto the porch, rifle held loose but ready. I'm listening. You got something that belongs to the shepherd. We'd like it back. Already told your boys I got nothing of yours. Grant's smile was cold. See, that's where you're wrong. The girl you're hiding in there, she's property of the compound, legal and binding. We got papers to prove it. Papers saying that you can own a person. Those went out of fashion after the war. Indentured servitude ain't slavery. It's a contract legal in this territory and recognized by the courts. The girl's family signed her over to work off debts. We're just collecting what's owed. Grant's hand rested on his gun belt, casual but threatening. Now you can make this easy and hand her over, or we can make it hard. Your choice. Jack's grip on the rifle tightened. She ain't going anywhere. You know who you're dealing with, old man. The shepherd's got 200 followers connections from here to Sacramento and enough money to buy this whole county twice over. You're one man with a shotgun and a death wish. Maybe so. But I'm one man standing on his own land defending what's right. And I'll be damned if I back down for you or your prophet or God himself. Grant's expression darkened. You're making a mistake. Ain't the first time. Won't be the last. One of the mounted men shifted in his saddle, his hand moving toward his rifle. Jack's rifle came up in a smooth motion centered on Grant's chest. Tell your man to be still, Jack said quietly, or we're going to have a problem right now. Grant raised his hand and the mounted man froze. Easy, Jack, we're just talking. Talking's done. You got 5 seconds to mount up and ride out. The shepherd's coming himself, Grant said, ignoring the ultimatum. Tomorrow night, with as many men as it takes. He wants the girl, but he'll settle for making an example out of you. Show folks what happens when you interfere with God's work." "God's work?" Jack's laugh was bitter. "You call torturing children God's work. I call it purification. I call it salvation. And I call it none of your damn business." Grant took a step forward. "Last chance, Mercer. Hand over the girl and we'll forget this happened. Keep her and you won't live to see the weekend." "Then I guess I better make my peace." Jack's aim never wavered. "Once. You're signing your own death warrant. 2. Grant stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide if Jack was bluffing. Whatever he saw in Jack's eyes must have convinced him, because he stepped back and whistled to his men. "Mount up," he ordered. The 4 riders shifted, ready to move. Grant swung back into his saddle with easy grace, then looked down at Jack. "The shepherd's going to enjoy breaking you. And when he's done, when you're bleeding out in the dirt, he's going to make that girl watch. Make her see what her curse brought down on you. Then he'll take her back, and every day for the rest of her miserable life she'll remember that you died for nothing. 3, 4, 5. Jack's finger tightened on the trigger, but Grant was already wheeling his horse around. The 5 riders thundered away, dust rising in their wake like smoke from a fire. Jack stood on the porch until they disappeared completely, then lowered the rifle and let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His hands were steady, but his heart was pounding like a war drum. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Tomorrow night. He's really coming." "Seems so." "With an army?" "Probably." Sarah leaned against the door frame, her legs suddenly unsteady. "We can't win this, Jack. Not against those numbers. Not against men like Grant Teller." Jack turned to look at her, and she saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not fear exactly, but a kind of fierce determination that bordered on reckless. "Maybe not," he said. "But we can make enough noise that someone notices. Come on, we got work to do." They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. Jack pulled out every weapon he owned, 2 rifles, the shotgun, his father's old Colt revolver, even a Derringer his wife had kept in her dresser. He laid them all out on the table and showed Sarah how each one worked, how to reload, how to clear a jam. "I told you I won't shoot anyone," Sarah said. "I know, but if I go down, you need to be able to make noise. Fire into the air and to the ground, doesn't matter. Just make them think twice about rushing in." Jack loaded the shotgun and set it by the door. "Sound is a weapon too, especially in the dark." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Jack hitched up his wagon and loaded it with supplies. Water, ammunition, a few blankets. Sarah watched him work, confusion crossing her face. "What are you doing?" "Making a choice." Jack climbed up onto the wagon seat. "Get in. We're going to town." "What? No, that's crazy. If the shepherd's men see us, then they see us. But we ain't hiding anymore. We're going to tell everyone who'll listen what's happening out here." Jack held out his hand. "Trust me." Sarah looked at his outstretched hand, then at the desert stretching endlessly around them. Every instinct screamed at her to hide, to run, to make herself small and invisible. But Jack was offering something she'd never had before, the chance to be seen, to be heard, to matter. She took his hand and climbed up beside him. The ride to Ridgecrest took 2 hours, the wagon bouncing over rough terrain as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. They didn't talk much. Jack was focused on the road, and Sarah was lost in her own thoughts, watching the landscape roll by. As they crested a hill, the town came into view. It wasn't much, maybe 40 buildings clustered around a main street with a few scattered homesteads on the outskirts. A church steeple rose above the other structures, and Jack could see lights beginning to appear in windows as people settled in for the evening. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked. "Saloon, most likely. That's where folks gather, where news spreads." Jack guided the wagon down the hill toward the main street. "We're going to tell them what's coming, what the shepherd really is. Some might help, most probably won't, but at least they'll know." They pulled up in front of a weathered building with a hand-painted sign reading "The Desert Rose." Music and voices spilled out into the street, along with the smell of whiskey and tobacco. Jack set the brake and climbed down, then helped Sarah descend. She stood on the boardwalk, suddenly conscious of her appearance, the scars, the borrowed clothes that hung loose on her frame, the way people on the street were already starting to stare. "I can't go in there," she whispered. "Yes, you can. Jack, look at me. Look at what they see. They'll think what we tell them to think." Jack's voice was firm but gentle. "You got a story that needs telling, and I'll be right beside you when you tell it." Sarah took a deep breath, then nodded. Together they pushed through the saloon doors. The interior was dim and smoky, lit by oil lamps hanging from the ceiling. Maybe 30 people were scattered around, men mostly playing cards or drinking at the bar, but a few women too. Conversation died as Jack and Sarah entered, all eyes turning toward them. Jack walked to the center of the room, Sarah close behind him. He could feel the weight of their stares, hear the whispers starting. Some recognized him, the hermit rancher who'd lost his family, who'd retreated into solitude. Others were looking at Sarah, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disgust to something that might have been pity. "Folks," Jack said, his voice cutting through the murmurs, "I got something you need to hear." A man at the bar turned a half-empty glass in his hand. "Jack Mercer, ain't seen you in town since the fire. What brings you out of your hole?" "Truth," Jack said simply. "And a warning." He told them everything about finding Sarah, about the compound, about the shepherd and his twisted theology. He told them about the underground rooms, the purification rituals, the children who'd died in the name of righteousness. Sarah stood beside him, silent, but present, her scars visible proof of his words. When Jack finished, the silence in the saloon was absolute. Then slowly people began to react. Some looked away uncomfortable. Others shook their heads in disbelief. A few muttered that Jack had lost his mind, that grief had finally broken him. But some, a precious few, looked at Sarah with new eyes, eyes that saw not a cursed girl but a survivor, a victim who'd escaped. An older woman pushed through the crowd, her face weathered by years in the desert sun. She stopped in front of Sarah and studied her carefully. "I had a niece," the woman said quietly. "Disappeared 5 years back. Family said she ran off with a drifter, but I never believed it. She had scars too before she vanished. Little ones hidden. Burns on her arms, she said, came from cooking accidents." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Was she there? At this compound?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "What was her name?" "Martha. Martha Colvin." Sarah closed her eyes, searching her memory. So many names, so many faces in those underground rooms. Then, like a candle flickering to life, she remembered. Brown hair, green eyes, a scar on her left hand shaped like a crescent. The woman gasped. Yes, that's her. Where is she? Is she—" "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and the woman knew before she said it. "She died 2 years ago. Fever. The shepherd wouldn't let us get a doctor. Said it was God's will." Sarah reached out and took the woman's hand. "But she wasn't alone. I was with her. She talked about you at the end, said you made the best apple pie in the county, said she could taste it even though she couldn't eat anymore." The woman broke down sobbing, and Sarah held her while she cried. The saloon had gone completely silent, now the weight of what they were hearing finally sinking in. A man in the back stood up tall, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone used to authority. "That's quite a tale, Mr. Mercer, but it's just that, a tale. The Shepherd's Compound is a respected institution in this county. They do good work taking in orphans and debtors, giving them purpose." "You work for him," Sarah said, her voice steady, despite the tears on the old woman's shoulder. "You're one of his lawyers." The man's face reddened. "I provide legal counsel to many people in this county. That doesn't mean—" "You're the one who draws up the contracts, the indenture papers that turn children into property." Sarah gently released the crying woman and faced the lawyer directly. "I saw you. Once. You came to the compound with papers for a boy named Thomas. He was 8 years old. His father had died and his mother couldn't feed 4 children. You made her sign him over for 7 years of labor. For $50. That's a legal transaction. He died 6 months later." Sarah continued, her voice cutting through his protests like a blade. "Beaten to death by one of the guards. But you didn't come back to check on him. You got your fee, and you didn't care what happened after." The lawyer looked around the saloon, seeing the doubt creeping into people's faces. This is slander. I'll have you both arrested. For what? Jack stepped forward, his presence filling the space. Telling the truth. Seems to me you're awful eager to shut us up. Makes a man wonder what you're trying to hide. Before the lawyer could respond, the saloon doors burst open. Grant Teller stood in the doorway, 4 armed men behind him. Well, Grant said, his voice dripping with false civility. Seems we got ourselves a town meeting. How democratic. Jack's hand moved to his gun, but Grant raised a finger in warning. I wouldn't. My boys are faster than you, old man. You'd be dead before you cleared leather. What do you want, Grant? Someone called from the crowd. Just came to collect some property that wandered off. Grant's eyes fixed on Sarah. The shepherd's been very patient, but his patience is wearing thin. The girl comes with me now, and the rest of you can go back to your drinking and pretending you don't know what's happening in your own backyard. She's not going anywhere, Jack said. Grant sighed theatrically. See, this is the problem with charity. You take in a stray and suddenly you think you got rights to it. He looked around the saloon. How many of you fine folks are willing to die for this girl, for this cursed, scarred piece of— She's a human being, the old woman said, stepping forward. Her face was still wet with tears, but her voice was iron. And if what she says about my Martha is true, then the shepherd's got blood on his hands, more blood than this town can ignore. Your Martha was weak, Grant said dismissively. God culled her from the herd. Be grateful she's in a better place now. The woman slapped him. The crack of her palm against his cheek echoed through the saloon like a gunshot. Grant's head snapped to the side, and for a moment nobody moved. Then Grant smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Sarah had ever seen. Slowly, deliberately, he backhanded the old woman, sending her sprawling to the floor. Jack's gun was out in an instant, but so were the guns of Grant's men. 5 barrels pointed at Jack, hammers cocked. Now, Grant said, rubbing his cheek. Let's not do anything stupid. You shoot me, my boys shoot you, then they shoot anyone who looks at them wrong. Is that what you want? A massacre in your nice saloon? You hit a woman. Jack said, his gun still trained on Grant. I disciplined an elder who forgot her place. There's a difference. Grant turned to the crowd. The shepherd's coming tomorrow night, coming to Mercer's ranch to reclaim what's his. Any of you interfere, any of you help this fool and his cursed whore, you'll answer to the shepherd. And trust me, his justice is harsh. Your shepherd ain't justice, Jack said. He's just a monster with a Bible. Grant's smile widened. Then come tomorrow night, you'll see how a monster deals with heresy. He gestured to his men. We're done here. They backed out of the saloon guns, still trained on Jack until they were through the doors. The sound of hoofbeats followed, fading into the night. Jack lowered his gun and rushed to the old woman, helping her to her feet. Her lip was split, bleeding, but she waved off his concern. I'm fine, she said. Had worse from my late husband when he was drunk. The lawyer had disappeared during the confrontation, probably slipping out the back. The rest of the crowd stood in stunned silence, processing what they'd witnessed. Finally, a grizzled man with a scar across his nose spoke up. What you gonna do, Jack? Stand my ground. Fight if I have to. Against how many? Grant said the shepherd's coming with an army. Then I'll face an army. That's suicide. Maybe, but it's suicide for something that matters. Jack looked around the saloon. I ain't asking anyone to join me. This is my fight. But if any of you got a conscience, if any of you are tired of looking the other way while evil parades around in righteousness, tomorrow night's your chance to do something about it. And if we don't, someone asked, then you don't, and you live with that choice, same as I'll live with mine. Jack took Sarah's arm gently. Come on, we should head back. They were almost to the door when a voice stopped them. I'll come. Jack turned. A young man stood up from a corner table, couldn't be more than 25, with the calloused hands of a ranch worker. Name's Daniel. I got no love for the shepherd. He took my sister 3 years back. If you're making a stand, I'm with you. Son, this ain't gonna end well. Don't care. I've been carrying guilt for 3 years, wondering if Emma's alive, if she's suffering. If she is, maybe this'll help her. If she ain't, maybe it'll give her some justice. Daniel grabbed his hat. When do we ride? Before Jack could answer, another voice spoke up. I'll come too. Then another. And me. Count me in. One by one, men stood. Not all of them, not even most. But enough. Enough that Jack felt something he hadn't felt in years' hope. By the time they left the saloon, Jack had 7 volunteers, 7 men willing to ride to his ranch to stand against the shepherd and his followers. It wasn't an army, but it was something. The old woman caught Sarah's hand as they left. "You tell me, true girl, did my Martha suffer?" Sarah looked into those grief-stricken eyes and made a choice. "No," she lied. "It was peaceful. She went to sleep and didn't wake up. No pain." The woman squeezed her hand. "Thank you for being with her, for remembering her." The ride back to the ranch was quiet. The volunteers followed in their own wagons and on horseback, a small caravan moving through the darkness. Above, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "You think it'll be enough?" Sarah asked. 7 men. "No," Jack said honestly, "but it's 7 more than we had this morning, and it's 7 witnesses. Whatever happens tomorrow night, folks will know about it. The shepherd can't hide this anymore." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then said, "That woman, Martha's aunt, I lied to her." "I know. Martha did suffer. She suffered terribly, screamed for days before the end, but I couldn't tell her that. Couldn't let that be her last memory of her niece." "You gave her peace," Jack said. "That's not a lie. That's mercy." When they reached the ranch, Jack showed the volunteers where to set up camp close enough to respond if trouble came far enough to have room to maneuver. They built small fires, checked their weapons, and settled in to wait. Inside the house, Jack and Sarah sat at the table. The lamp cast long shadows across the floor, making the small room feel both intimate and vast. "Tomorrow night," Sarah said. "He's really coming." "Yeah." "What do you think happens?" "Best case?" Jack considered the question. "Best case. The shepherd comes with his men, sees we're ready, sees we got witnesses and backs down. Realizes that hurting us won't be quiet, won't be hidden. Maybe he cuts his losses and disappears. And worst case, we all die. The shepherd burns this place to the ground, with us in it, then spins some story about how we were dangerous criminals or devil worshippers or whatever fits his narrative. Your body disappears, and in a year, nobody remembers this ever happened." Sarah nodded slowly. "And most likely, case, somewhere in between, blood gets spilled. Maybe we make enough noise that the law gets involved, real law, not the bought kind. Maybe we don't. But either way, something changes. The shepherd's world gets a little smaller, a little more exposed." Jack looked at her. "That enough for you?" "It's more than I've ever had." Sarah's hand found his across the table. "Jack, if tomorrow goes bad, if I don't get to say it later, thank you. For seeing me. For treating me like I'm human. For giving me hope when I thought I'd forgotten what it felt like." Jack's throat tightened. "Sarah, let me finish. You asked me once what my name was, what I called myself. I've been thinking about that. For 4 years I was nothing, just a thing to be used. But these past 2 days with you, I remembered. I'm Sarah. Just Sarah. And that's enough. It's more than enough." They sat in silence, hands clasped, while outside the volunteers kept watch and the desert night pressed in around them. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring, violence or peace, death or deliverance. But tonight, in this moment, they had something the shepherd could never take away. They had each other. They had purpose. They had hope. And sometimes in a hard world, that was victory enough. Dawn came too quickly and not quickly enough. Jack had dozed in his chair, the shotgun still across his lap, jerking awake at every sound, the creak of settling wood, the distant cry of a hawk, the murmur of voices from the volunteers camped outside. Sarah had finally fallen asleep in the back room around 3 a.m, exhausted beyond fear. When the first light broke over the eastern hills, Jack stood and stretched his back, protesting the night spent in the chair. He walked to the window and looked out at the camp. The volunteers were stirring, building up their fires, checking weapons. 7 men who'd chosen to stand with strangers against impossible odds. 7 men who might die today because they believed in something bigger than their own survival. The door to the back room opened and Sarah emerged. Her hair was tangled from sleep and there were dark circles under her eyes, but something in her bearing had changed. She stood straighter, moved with more purpose, like she'd made peace with whatever was coming. Morning, Jack said. Is it? Sarah moved to the window beside him. Feels more like the end of something. Could be the end, could be the beginning. Won't know till it's over. They stood together watching the sun climb higher, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. Outside, Daniel, the young ranch hand who'd been the first to volunteer, approached the house and knocked. Jack opened the door. Morning. Morning, Mr. Mercer. Thought you should know we got movement on the South Ridge. Riders. Maybe a dozen, hard to tell with the dust. Jack's jaw tightened. They're coming early. Wanted to catch us before we were ready. We're as ready as we'll get, Daniel said, but his voice betrayed his nervousness. What do you want us to do? Hold position. Don't fire unless they fire first. We want witnesses to see who started this, who brought the violence. Jack grabbed his rifle. But if they do start shooting you, put them down. No hesitation. These men won't show you mercy, so don't show them none. Daniel nodded and headed back to the others. Jack turned to Sarah. You remember what I taught you about the guns? I remember. But Jack, I meant what I said. I know, you won't shoot anyone, that's fine. But if things go sideways, if I go down, you take that shotgun and you make noise. Fire it in the air out the window, doesn't matter. Just let folks know there's still someone alive in here fighting. Sarah's hands trembled slightly. I don't want you to die for me. Then don't let me die for nothing. Whatever happens today, you survive it. You tell the story. You make sure people know what the shepherd really is. Jack cupped her face gently. Promise me. I promise. The riders came into clear view about 20 minutes later. Not a dozen closer to 20, they spread out in a wide semicircle around the ranch, staying just out of rifle range. The volunteers had positioned themselves behind the wagon, some fence posts and a water trough, meager cover, but better than nothing. At the center of the line of riders sat a man who could only be the shepherd. He was older than Jack expected, maybe 60, with white hair and a beard that gave him the look of an Old Testament prophet. He wore black from head to toe, and even from a distance, Jack could feel the weight of his presence, the way the other riders deferred to him, the way he sat his horse like a king surveying his kingdom. Grant Teller rode at the shepherd's right hand. At his left was a woman, tall, severe, dressed in dark wool despite the heat. She held a Bible in one hand and a riding crop in the other. The shepherd raised his hand and the riders stopped. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the shepherd dismounted with surprising grace for a man his age. He walked forward slowly, stopping about 50 yards from the house. Jack Mercer, his voice carried across the distance like a preacher's from a pulpit. I've heard much about you. A man of principle, they say. A man who lost everything and learned to live with nothing. Jack stepped out onto the porch, rifle held ready. You got something to say? Say it. I'm saying I understand you. Loss is a cruel teacher, but a thorough one. It strips away illusions, leaves only the hard truths. The shepherd's eyes were pale blue, almost colorless. But understanding doesn't mean I'll abide what you've done. You've taken something that belongs to the Lord's work. I want it back. She's not an it. She's a person, and she doesn't belong to anyone. The shepherd smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Everything belongs to someone, Mr. Mercer. The land belongs to the strong, the sheep belong to the shepherd, and the cursed belong to those with the strength to purify them. That what you call it purification, Jack's voice was hard. Beating children, burning them, working them to death in your underground cells. I call it salvation. I call it the hard mercy that rescues damned souls from eternal suffering. The shepherd spread his arms wide. You've been deceived, Mr. Mercer. The girl you're protecting, she's filled your head with lies, made you think we're monsters when we're merely servants of the divine. I seen her scars. Scars don't lie. Scars are evidence of purification, of sin being burned away, beaten out, bled from the flesh, so the soul can be clean. The shepherd's voice took on a rhythmic quality like he was preaching. The cursed are born marked, Mr. Mercer, marked by original sin so deep that ordinary prayer, ordinary penance cannot touch it. They require extraordinary measures, harsh measures, but measures born of love, not hate. Sarah appeared in the doorway behind Jack, and the shepherd's eyes fixed on her immediately. Ah, there she is. Sarah, child of misfortune, killer of mothers. Come back to us, child. Your purification is not complete. My name is Sarah. she said, her voice steady, despite the fear Jack could see in her eyes. Not child, not thing, not cursed. Sarah, and I'm not going anywhere with you. The shepherd's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those pale eyes, anger maybe, or calculation. You've been listening to this man's poison. He's made you believe you have choices, rights, but you don't, child. You signed yourself over to our care, legal and binding. I was 12, Sarah said. 12 years old, and you made my dying father put his mark on a paper he couldn't read. That's not a contract. That's theft. Your father understood what he was doing. He was giving his cursed daughter a chance at redemption, a chance we've provided for 7 years now. The shepherd's voice hardened. 7 years of food shelter guidance, 7 years of mercy you've repaid with defiance. 7 years of hell, Sarah shot back. 7 years of being told I was worthless, that I killed my mother, that I deserved every beating, every burn, every... Her voice broke, but she pushed through. You're not a shepherd, you're a wolf, and I'm done being your prey. The shepherd's face remained calm, but his hands clenched at his sides. Mr. Mercer, I'm going to give you one final chance. Send the girl out. Do it now, and you and your associates can walk away. You have my word. Your word ain't worth the breath you used to speak it, Jack said. Then you've made your choice. The shepherd turned and walked back toward his horse. Grant, make them understand the price of defiance. Grant Teller grinned and raised his hand. The riders began to advance, spreading wider, moving to encircle the ranch completely. Hold! Jack shouted to the volunteers. Don't fire till they're in range. The riders came on slowly, deliberately. Some dismounted and took cover behind rocks and scrub. Others stayed mounted, rifles across their saddles. They were professional about it. No rush, no panic, just the steady advance of men who knew their business. When they were about 40 yards out, Jack fired a warning shot into the ground in front of the nearest rider. The crack of the rifle echoed across the desert. That's far enough, Jack shouted. Next one hits meat. The rider stopped. For a moment there was silence except for the wind whistling through the sage. Then Grant Teller laughed. You're outnumbered 3-1, old man. You really think you can hold us off? Maybe not, but we'll damn sure make you pay for every foot of ground. One of the volunteers shouted back, a man named Pete, a former soldier who'd fought in the Indian campaigns. The shepherd, still mounted at a safe distance, raised his Bible. The Lord is my shepherd, he called out, his voice carrying across the battlefield. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He's blessing them, Sarah whispered, giving them permission, making them believe they're righteous. Jack had seen this before during the war. Officers praying before battle chaplains, blessing soldiers before they marched to their deaths. It was the same everywhere, make men believe God was on their side, and they do anything. He restoreth my soul, the shepherd continued. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. A shot rang out, not from Jack's side, but from the shepherd's. One of the riders had fired at the volunteers, the bullet kicking up dust near Pete's position. Return fire, Jack shouted. The desert erupted in gunfire. Rifles cracked, pistols barked, and the air filled with the smell of gunpowder. Jack fired methodically, aiming for the riders, trying to drive them back. The volunteers followed suit, their shots disciplined despite their fear. Sarah ducked back inside the house as bullets thudded into the wood. She crawled to the window and peered out, watching the battle unfold. Men on both sides were taking cover, firing, reloading. One of the shepherd's riders went down, clutching his leg. One of the volunteers, an older man named Thomas, slumped behind the wagon, blood spreading across his shoulder. The fight went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The shepherd's men had numbers, but Jack's group had position and motivation. Every time the riders tried to advance, they were driven back by concentrated fire. Then Grant Teller did something unexpected. He stood up from behind his cover, completely exposed, and walked toward the house. Bullets kicked up dust around him, but he didn't flinch, didn't run. He just walked steady and calm, like he was taking a stroll. Cease fire, Jack shouted. Something was wrong. Nobody walked into gunfire like that unless they knew something. Grant stopped about 20 yards from the house. Here's the thing, Mercer. While we've been keeping you busy up front, some of my boys circled around back. They're in your barn right now, and they got something interesting. Want to know what it is?" Jack's blood ran cold. The barn. He'd left it unlocked, unguarded. Grant whistled, and two men emerged from the barn, dragging someone between them. At first, Jack couldn't make out who it was. Then his heart stopped. It was a woman. Not Sarah, someone else. She was thin, ragged, with a burlap sack over her head, just like Sarah had worn. The men forced her to her knees in the open space between the barn and the house. "Found her hiding in your hayloft," Grant called out. "Seems your girl wasn't the only one who escaped. Seems we got ourselves a pattern of theft here." Sarah gasped. "Emma! That's Emma, Daniel's sister." Daniel broke from cover, standing up despite the danger. "Emma! Emma! I'm here!" "Daniel, no!" Jack shouted, but it was too late. One of the shepherd's men fired not at Daniel but at the ground near his feet. Daniel froze. "Sit back down, boy," Grant said, "or the next one goes in her head." He gestured to the men holding Emma. "Take off the sack. Let her brother see what his interference has cost." They pulled the sack off, and even from a distance, Jack could see the damage. Emma's face was swollen, bruised, covered in burns. Her eyes were wide with terror, and when she saw Daniel, she began to cry. "Danny!" she called out, her voice broken. "Danny, I'm sorry. I just wanted to go home. I just wanted—" The shepherd rode forward, looking down at Emma with something like disappointment. "This is what happens when the cursed try to escape their purification. They spread their curse to others. They corrupt the righteous." He looked at Jack. "Your choice is simple, Mr. Mercer. Send out Sarah or Emma dies. You have 60 seconds. "Don't do it, Jack!" Sarah was at the door now, tears streaming down her face. "Don't give them anything!" Daniel was on his feet, walking toward his sister, despite the guns trained on him. "Emma, I'm coming. Grant shot him, not to kill, but to stop. The bullet took Daniel in the leg, and he went down hard, screaming. 50 seconds, the shepherd said calmly. "You bastard!" Jack raised his rifle, but there were too many guns pointed at Emma now. If he fired, she'd die. Sarah grabbed his arm. "I'll go. I'll trade myself for her. Just let them take me." "No." "Jack, she's innocent. She doesn't deserve this. If I go, maybe they'll let her live, let Daniel live. They'll kill them anyway. Soon as they have you, they'll kill everyone here." Jack's mind was racing, trying to find a way out, a solution that didn't end in death. 30 seconds. The woman who'd been with the shepherd, the severe one with the Bible, dismounted and walked to where Emma knelt. She pulled out a long knife, placing it against Emma's throat. 20 seconds. "Stop!" Sarah pushed past Jack, running out of the house into the open. "Stop, I'll go. Just don't hurt her." "Sarah, no!" Jack lunged for her, but she was already too far away. Sarah walked across the distance to where Emma knelt, her hands raised. "I'm coming. I'm surrendering. Just let her go. Please." The shepherd watched her approach with those cold, pale eyes. When Sarah was close enough, he nodded to Grant, who grabbed her arm roughly. "Smart girl," Grant said. "Finally learned your place." "Now let Emma go," Sarah said. That was the deal. The shepherd tilted his head as if considering. Then he smiled. "I made no deal. I gave you a choice, her life for your surrender. You surrendered, but I never said I'd spare her." He nodded to the woman with the knife. "No," Sarah screamed, struggling against Grant's grip. "No, you promised." "I promised nothing," the shepherd said. "And you should know by now mercy to the cursed is cruelty to the righteous." The woman drew the knife across Emma's throat. Blood sprayed and Emma's body crumpled to the ground. Daniel's scream was inhuman, torn from somewhere deep and primal. He crawled toward his sister, his wounded leg leaving a trail of blood in the dust. The shepherd's men let him go. They'd made their point. Sarah had stopped struggling. She just stared at Emma's body, something breaking inside her that Jack could see even from the porch. "Bring the girl," the shepherd ordered. "We're done here." But Jack wasn't done. White-hot rage filled him, burning away fear, burning away caution. He raised his rifle and fired. The shot took Grant Teller in the shoulder, spinning him around and releasing his grip on Sarah. "Run!" Jack shouted. "Sarah, run!" Everything happened at once. The volunteers opened fire again, focusing on the men around Sarah. The shepherd's riders returned fire, but they were confused now, their easy victory suddenly complicated. Sarah ran stumbling over the rough ground, while bullets kicked up dust around her feet. She was almost to the house when the woman with the Bible stepped into her path. The knife was still in her hand, still red with Emma's blood. She grabbed Sarah by the hair, yanking her head back, bringing the knife to her throat. "One more step, any of you, and she bleeds like the other one," the woman screamed. Jack's rifle was trained on her, but the angle was wrong. Sarah was in the way, blocking a clean shot. Then Sarah did something no one expected. She went limp, her legs giving out, using her own weight to drop from the woman's grasp. The woman stumbled, trying to hold on, and for just a second, Sarah was clear. Jack fired. The bullet took the woman in the chest, punching her backward. She hit the ground hard, the knife falling from her hand. Sarah scrambled the last few feet to the porch, and Jack pulled her inside, slamming the door. Bullets hammered into the wood, but the thick planks held. Outside, chaos reigned. The shepherd was shouting orders, trying to regain control. Grant Teller was down, cursing and bleeding. Daniel had reached Emma's body and was holding her, rocking back and forth, his screams subsiding into broken sobs. The volunteers were still firing, keeping the shepherd's men pinned down. But Jack knew it was only a matter of time. They had limited ammunition, and the shepherd had numbers. This was a delay, not a victory. Then in the distance, a new sound cut through the gunfire. Hoofbeats. A lot of them. Everyone paused. Guns still raised, trying to place the sound. Over the western ridge, riders appeared. At least 30 of them riding hard, and at their head was a man wearing a marshal's badge that caught the sunlight. "Federal marshals," someone shouted. "It's the law." The shepherd's face went pale. He wheeled his horse around, shouting to his men, "Withdraw, back to the compound." But Grant Teller, bleeding from his shoulder, wasn't done. "The girl we can't leave without—" "I said withdraw." The shepherd's voice cracked like a whip. "Now." The riders retreated in organized chaos, some grabbing wounded companions, others just fleeing. The shepherd led the retreat, his white hair streaming behind him like a flag of surrender. The marshals didn't pursue. They reined in at the ranch, their leader, a lean man with gray at his temples, dismounting carefully. "Someone want to tell me what in God's name is going on here?" he asked, surveying the scene. The wounded, the dead, the ranch house pocked with bullet holes. Jack stepped out onto the porch, Sarah beside him. "Marshal, my name's Jack Mercer, and I got a story you need to hear." The marshal looked at Sarah, taking in her scars, her torn clothes, the haunted look in her eyes. Then he looked at Emma's body, at Daniel still holding his dead sister, at the volunteers slowly emerging from cover. "I expect you do," he said quietly. "I expect you do." The rest of the day was a blur. The marshal, his name was Clayton Hayes, took statements from everyone. Sarah told her story, every detail, while a deputy wrote it all down. The other volunteers confirmed what they'd seen and heard. Daniel, when he could finally speak, told about his sister's disappearance, about the rumors he'd heard, about the fear that had kept him silent for 3 years. Marshal Hayes listened to it all, his face growing harder with each revelation. When they were done, he stood and looked toward the south, where the shepherd's compound lay hidden beyond the horizon. "I've heard whispers," he said. "For years I've heard whispers about that compound. But whispers aren't evidence. And every time I tried to investigate, I hit walls. Judges who wouldn't issue warrants. Sheriffs who claimed everything was legal. Politicians who said I was overstepping." He looked at Sarah. "But this is different. This is witnesses. This is blood in the dirt. This is a body I can't ignore." "What happens now?" Jack asked. "Now I go get a warrant. A real one from a judge who isn't in the shepherd's pocket. Then I come back with every marshal in the territory, and we tear that compound apart." Hayes's jaw was set. "And we bring every one of those bastards to justice." "They'll run?" Sarah said. "The shepherd grant the others. They'll disappear before you can arrest them." "Maybe, but their compound won't disappear. Those underground rooms won't disappear. And the people they left behind, the followers, the families, some of them will talk. Some of them will want deals." Hayes put a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You started something here today, miss? Something that can't be stopped. The shepherd's kingdom is falling even if he doesn't know it yet." As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of red and gold, they buried Emma in the hard ground behind Jack's barn. Daniel insisted on doing it himself despite his wounded leg. The volunteers helped him dig, helped him lay his sister to rest. There were no prayers, no scripture, just Daniel's quiet words spoken to the sister he'd failed to save. "I'm sorry, Em. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I'm sorry I let fear keep me quiet." He placed a handful of desert flowers on the fresh grave. "But I promise you your death won't be for nothing. None of them will be for nothing." That night, most of the volunteers departed, riding back to their homes and families. A few stayed keeping watch in case the shepherd tried to regroup. Daniel stayed too, sitting by his sister's grave, keeping vigil. Inside the house, Jack and Sarah sat at the table, exhausted beyond words. The lamp burned low between them, and for a long time neither spoke. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "She died because of me. Emma. She died because I wouldn't go quietly. She died because the shepherd's a monster. Don't you dare take that on yourself. But if you had just surrendered, you'd be dead too, and Emma would still be dead, and the shepherd would still be out there doing the same things to other girls, other children." Jack reached across the table, taking her hand. "Evil doesn't stop because you submit to it, Sarah. It only stops when someone stands up and says no more." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "It hurts. Knowing she's gone. Knowing I'm alive because she's dead. That's called survivor's guilt. I know it well." Jack's grip on her hand tightened. "But you can't let it eat you alive. You gotta take that pain and turn it into something. Into justice. Into change. Into a reason to keep fighting." How do I do that?" "You live. You testify. You make sure every person in that compound gets freed. You make sure Emma's death means the end of the shepherd's reign." Jack's voice was fierce. "You don't honor the dead by dying with them, Sarah. You honor them by living the life they never got to have." Sarah nodded, slowly wiping her eyes. Okay, I'll try." They sat together as the night deepened, two survivors holding on to each other in the darkness. Outside, the desert was quiet except for the wind and the distant cry of a coyote. But it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the silence of fear, but the stillness of something ending and something new beginning. The shepherd's kingdom was crumbling. The curse, the lie that had defined Sarah's entire life, was breaking. And in its place, something fragile but real was growing. Hope. Not the desperate hope of the dying, but the steady hope of the survivor. The hope that says tomorrow might be better. The hope that says the fight was worth it, even when the cost was high. Sarah squeezed Jack's hand. "Thank you for everything, for saving me, for fighting for me, for showing me I'm worth saving." "You were always worth saving," Jack said quietly. "You just needed someone to see it." In the darkness outside, Daniel sat by his sister's grave, keeping his promise. The volunteers kept watch rifles ready, and somewhere to the south, the shepherd fled into the night, his empire crumbling behind him. But here in this small ranch house in the heart of the Mojave, two broken people had found something neither expected. They'd found each other. They'd found purpose. They'd found the strength to stand against the darkness. And in the end, that was worth every scar, every tear, every drop of blood spilled in the dust. The days that followed moved with the strange rhythm of aftermath moments of frantic activity, punctuated by long stretches of waiting. Marshal Hayes returned 3 days later with a contingent of federal marshals and a warrant signed by a territorial judge 200 miles away, far beyond the shepherd's reach. They rode south toward the compound at dawn, a column of law and justice finally coming for men who'd hidden behind righteousness for too long. Jack and Sarah didn't go with them. Hayes had been clear they were witnesses, not deputies, and their presence would only complicate things. So they waited at the ranch. Sarah restless and pacing, Jack quietly maintaining the weapons they'd used in the fight, cleaning and oiling them with methodical care. Daniel had stayed too recovered enough from his leg wound to move around, though he still limped. He'd built a simple wooden cross for Emma's grave and spent hours out there talking to her like she could still hear him. Sometimes Jack would see Sarah sitting beside him, the two of them sharing the particular grief of survivors, the guilt of living when others didn't, the weight of unanswered questions, the slow understanding that life would go on even when it felt like it shouldn't. On the 4th day, a rider came from town, not a marshal, but the old woman from the saloon. Martha's aunt, whose name was Ruth. She drove a wagon loaded with supplies, food blankets, medicine, and 3 other women Jack had never seen before. "Heard what you did," Ruth said as she climbed down from the wagon seat. "Heard you stood up to the shepherd, made him run. Figured you might need help with what comes next." "What comes next?" Sarah asked. Ruth gestured to the women in the wagon. "Marshal Hayes sent word to us. Said when they raided the compound, they found 6 children in those underground rooms. 6 survivors. They need somewhere to go, someone to care for them until families can be found or made." She looked at Sarah directly. "Figured you'd understand what they need better than most." Sarah's hand went to her throat, touching the scars there. 6. There were 6. 2 boys, 4 girls, ages ranging from 10 to maybe 16, hard to tell the way they've been treated. The marshals got them out, got them to a doctor in Ridgecrest, but the doc says what they need most now ain't medicine. It's safety. It's people who understand. Ruth's voice softened. "It's people like you, child. People who've been where they are." Jack stepped forward. "This ranch ain't much. I got space in the barn, could fix it up proper, but—" "We brought supplies to make it livable," one of the other women interrupted. She was younger than Ruth, maybe 40, with strong hands and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Lumber nails, fabric for partitions. We can turn that barn into decent quarters in a few days if we all work together." Sarah looked at Jack, uncertainty in her eyes. "This is your home. I can't ask you to—" "You ain't asking. I'm offering." Jack's voice was firm. "This place has been dead for 3 years, just me and ghosts and silence. Maybe it's time it became something else. Something living." "You sure about this?" Sarah asked. "Taking in 6 damaged children, dealing with their nightmares, their fears, everything the shepherd did to them. It's not going to be easy." "Nothing worth doing ever is." Jack looked at Ruth and her companions. "When can they come?" "Tomorrow if you're ready. Marshal Hayes wants them out of town. Too many of the shepherd's followers still around making threats, causing trouble. Says they'll be safer here where folks know what happened, where people will protect them." "Then we'll be ready," Jack said. They worked through the night and into the next day. The barn was cleaned out, the smell of horses and hay replaced with fresh wood and paint. They built partitions to create separate spaces, not cells, but rooms, places where children could have privacy, could feel safe. The women from town brought mattresses and quilts, simple but clean. They hung curtains, placed wildflowers in jars, did everything they could to make the space feel like a home instead of a prison. Sarah worked alongside them, and Jack noticed how she moved through the space, checking corners, making sure there were multiple exits, ensuring no door could be locked from the outside. She was building the opposite of what she'd known, a place where children could leave whenever they wanted, where they controlled their own space, where safety wasn't a privilege but a guarantee. When the wagon arrived the next afternoon, Jack and Sarah stood together on the porch waiting. Marshal Hayes drove it himself, and in the back, huddled together like wounded birds, were 6 children. The oldest was a girl, maybe 16, with dark skin and eyes that had seen too much. She held the hand of a younger boy, maybe 10, whose face was covered in burn scars. 2 other girls sat close together, twins, perhaps both blonde and gaunt. Another boy, maybe 12, stared at nothing, rocking slightly. And the smallest, a girl who couldn't be more than 10, clutched a ragged doll, like it was the only real thing in the world. Hayes climbed down from the wagon slowly. "They're skittish," he said quietly. "Any loud noise, any sudden movement, they panic. The doctor had to sedate 2 of them just to examine them. And the things he found," Hayes's jaw tightened. "The things he found would make a grown man weep." Sarah stepped forward, moving slowly, keeping her hands visible. "My name is Sarah," she said, her voice gentle but clear. "I was where you are. I know what you've been through, and I promise you, you're safe here. No one will hurt you anymore." The oldest girl studied Sarah, taking in her scars, her stance, the way she moved, like someone who understood fear intimately. "You were at the compound for 4 years, in the rooms underground. I know the scratches on the walls, the names carved there. I know the darkness and the ceremonies and the pain." Sarah's voice didn't waver. "And I know what it's like to think you'll never escape, that this is all there is. But I'm here now, free. And you are too. The girl's eyes filled with tears. They said no one ever really gets free, that the curse follows us forever. There is no curse. There never was. That was just a lie they told to control us, to make us believe we deserved what they did. Sarah held out her hand. Come, let me show you something. Slowly, hesitantly, the girl climbed down from the wagon. The other children followed, clinging to each other, moving as a single unit of shared fear and fragile hope. Sarah led them to the barn. When she opened the doors, revealing the transformed space, the clean rooms, the flowers, the sunlight streaming through windows, the smallest girl gasped. "This is for us," she whispered. "This is for you," Sarah confirmed. "Your space, your home, for as long as you need it." The boy with the burn scars touched the door frame. "Can we lock it?" "From the inside, yes. So you feel safe, but never from the outside. You can always leave, always." Sarah knelt down to his level. "What's your name?" "They called me different things, bad things." "What do you want to be called?" The boy thought about it as if the concept of choosing his own name was foreign. "Thomas. I think my mother called me Thomas. Before." "Then Thomas it is." Sarah stood and addressed all of them. "You all get to choose your names, your rooms, how you spend your days. No one will tell you who to be anymore. That's over." The oldest girl, who later said her name was Rachel, stepped forward. "What's the catch?" "There's always a catch." "No catch. Just life. Real life. With choices and mistakes and second chances." Sarah's voice was steady. "It won't be easy. You'll have nightmares. You'll be scared. You'll remember things you wish you could forget. But you won't be alone. And you won't be going back." Over the following weeks, the ranch transformed. The barn became a haven for the 6 children, each finding their own rhythm, their own way of healing. Thomas spent hours in the sun, soaking in warmth like he was storing it against future darkness. The twins Mary and Martha rarely separated, communicating in whispers and shared glances. The rocking boy, who said his name was Peter, slowly began to still, to engage, to occasionally smile. The youngest, who chose the name Hope because it sounded nice, attached herself to Sarah like a shadow. Rachel, the oldest, became Sarah's right hand. She'd been at the compound the longest 7 years and carried scars both visible and hidden. But she also carried strength, a fierce protectiveness for the younger ones, and a sharp intelligence that had survived despite everything done to break her. "I want to testify," Rachel told Sarah one evening as they prepared supper. "When they bring the shepherd to trial, I want to stand up and tell everyone what he did." "That's brave. But it'll be hard. They'll ask you questions, make you relive it all." "I relive it every night anyway. At least this way it means something." Rachel chopped vegetables with precise, angry movements. "At least this way he pays." News from the compound came in pieces. Marshal Hayes visited regularly, updating them on the investigation. The shepherd had fled, disappearing into Mexico or beyond, but Grant Teller had been captured trying to cross the border. The woman with the Bible, her name was Sister Judith, had died from her wound. Others had been arrested, including the lawyer who'd drawn up the false indentures. But the real revelation came when the marshals searched the compound thoroughly. The underground rooms were worse than Sarah had described, not just cells, but chambers designed for specific tortures, each with its own terrible purpose. And in a locked office in the main house, they found records. Meticulous records. Names, dates, transactions. Every child who'd passed through the shepherd's hands in 20 years. Every family who'd paid to have a cursed child taken away. Every follower who'd participated in the purifications. 143 children, Hayes said, his voice hollow. In 20 years, 143 children went through that compound. We're still trying to figure out how many survived, how many died, where the survivors might be now. Sarah felt sick. 143. Your testimony, Rachel's the others. It's going to bring down more than just the shepherd. It's going to expose a whole network. Families, officials, business owners. People who knew and participated or knew and stayed silent. Hayes looked tired, older than his years. This is bigger than any of us realized. As spring turned towards summer, more survivors began to appear. Word spread through the underground networks of the displaced and damaged, whispered in saloons, shared in letters passed along dusty roads. The ranch at the edge of the Mojave had become a refuge, a place where the shepherd's former victims could find safety. A young woman arrived on foot, having walked 30 miles from a town where she'd been working as a servant for one of the families. A teenage boy came on a stolen horse, his back still bearing fresh whip marks. Two sisters appeared together, supporting each other, neither willing to speak about what they'd endured. Jack's ranch became something he'd never imagined a community. The main house was always full now, with Sarah and Rachel organizing meals, Ruth and the other women from town helping with supplies and support. The barn housed the children, but more structures were being built, a bunkhouse for the older survivors, a common area where they could gather, even a small schoolroom where Ruth taught reading and writing to those who'd never learned. Daniel, recovered from his wound, became the ranch's protector. He taught the older boys how to shoot, how to defend themselves, how to stand tall. But more importantly, he showed them that men could be gentle, could be trusted, could be something other than threats. "My sister would have loved this," he told Jack one evening as they watched the children play in the yard, actually play, laughing and running like children should. "She always talked about having a big family, a place where everyone belonged." "She's part of this," Jack said. "Her death helped bring it about. That means something." "Does it? Because some days I think about that knife, about watching her die, and I can't see meaning in it. Just waste." Jack was quiet for a moment. "Meaning ain't in the dying. It's in what the living do after. You've turned your grief into protection for others. That's Emma's legacy as much as your own." The trial of Grant Teller and the captured followers began in late summer. Sarah, Rachel, and 3 other survivors made the journey to the territorial capital to testify. Jack went with them, along with Daniel and Marshall Hayes. The courtroom was packed, journalists from as far as San Francisco, curious citizens, and a surprising number of the shepherd's former followers there to see their world finally exposed. Sarah testified first. She stood in the witness box, hands steady despite the tremor in her voice, and told her story. Every detail, every scar, every moment of suffering. The courtroom was silent, except for her words, and when she finished, several jurors were weeping. Rachel testified next, her anger giving her strength. She named names, the families who'd participated, the followers who'd held her down during purifications, the officials who'd looked the other way. Her testimony was a systematic dismantling of the entire network, and with each revelation, the spectators' shock deepened. The defense tried to argue religious freedom, tried to claim the purifications were sacraments, that the survivors were lying or delusional. But the physical evidence was overwhelming, the scars, the underground chambers, the records, the bodies they'd exhumed from the compound grounds. Grant Teller himself seemed almost bored by the proceedings, right up until the moment Rachel described watching him kill Emma. Then something in his face cracked just for a moment before the mask of righteousness returned. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. Grant Teller was sentenced to hang. The other captured followers received prison sentences ranging from 10 years to life. Warrants were issued for dozens more, including the shepherd himself, though everyone knew he was long gone. But the trial accomplished something more important than punishment. It made the invisible visible. Newspapers across the West carried the story, forcing people to confront what had been happening in their midst. Other compounds, other operations that used religion to mask cruelty found themselves under scrutiny. The conversation changed from "this can't be happening" to "how do we make sure it never happens again?" Sarah and the others returned to the ranch exhausted but vindicated. They'd stood up, spoken out, and been believed. For survivors of the shepherd's compound, that belief was perhaps the greatest victory of all. As autumn approached, painting the desert in shades of gold, and rust life at the ranch settled into something resembling normalcy. The children were healing slowly, with setbacks and hard days, but healing nonetheless. Thomas had stopped flinching at every shadow. The twins were learning to be individuals as well as a unit. Peter rarely rocked anymore. Hope still had nightmares, but she'd learned to ask for comfort instead of suffering alone. New survivors still arrived occasionally, but the flood had slowed to a trickle. Most of the shepherd's victims had been found helped, given new starts. The ranch would always be there for those who needed it, but it was becoming less a crisis shelter and more a home. One afternoon, Sarah walked out to the fence line where Jack had first found her. She carried the burlap sack, the one that had been tied over her head that day, the one Jack had removed with shaking hands. She'd kept it, though she didn't know why. Maybe as a reminder. maybe as proof that she'd survived. Jack found her there, the sack in her hands. "What you doing out here?" remembering and saying goodbye. Sarah looked at the sack, this symbol of her suffering, of everything the shepherd had tried to make her believe about herself. "I thought about burning it, making some big gesture, but that gives it too much importance." "So what are you going to do?" Sarah walked to the fence and hung the sack on a post. "Let the wind take it, let the desert claim it, let it fade to nothing the way it deserves to." They stood together watching the wind catch the burlap, making it flutter and dance. Eventually, a stronger gust would tear it free, send it tumbling across the desert until it disintegrated into threads and dust. But for now, it just hung there, a marker of where one story ended and another began. "You ever think about leaving?" Jack asked. "Going somewhere without memories, starting completely fresh?" "Every day. And every day I decide to stay." Sarah turned to face him. "Because this isn't just where I was saved. It's where I learned to save myself. It's where I learned I'm not cursed, not damned, not any of the things they said. I'm just Sarah. And Sarah belongs here." Jack smiled, the expression coming easier now, more natural. "The others feel the same way. Most of them. Rachel wants to become a marshal, help find other operations like the shepherds. Thomas wants to be a rancher, says he's going to buy the land next to yours when he's old enough. The twins want to open a school." Sarah's voice was warm with pride. "They're all planning futures, real futures. That's what you gave them, Jack. That's what this place gave them. We gave them. This was you as much as me. Then we gave them hope. We gave them the chance to be more than their scars." Sarah looked back at the sack on the fence. "And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, they walked back to the ranch house together. In the distance, they could hear the children's voices calling to each other as they finished their chores. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney, carrying the smell of Ruth's cooking. Laughter, actual, genuine laughter, drifted from the barn. That evening, they all gathered for supper. Sarah, Jack, the 6 children from the compound, Daniel, Ruth, and 3 newer arrivals who were still learning to trust, still learning to believe in safety. The table was crowded, loud, chaotic in the way that families are. Hope, sitting next to Sarah, looked around at all the faces. "Is this what normal feels like?" Sarah squeezed her hand. "I don't know if there's such a thing as normal, but this feels like home, and maybe that's better." Later, after the children were settled for the night and the visitors had departed, Sarah stood on the porch, looking out at the desert. The stars were brilliant overhead, uncountable and eternal. Jack joined her 2 cups of coffee in his hands, passing one to her. "You know," Jack said, 3 months ago I was just waiting to die. Going through the motions, but not really living. Then you showed up all bound and sacked and everything changed." "Sorry about that," Sarah said with a slight smile. "Don't be. You reminded me what it feels like to care about something, to fight for something, to be alive." Jack sipped his coffee. "My wife and daughter, I'll always carry them, but I'm not just carrying grief anymore. I'm carrying hope too. Because of you, because of all of this." Sarah leaned against the porch railing. "You saved my life, Jack. I don't just mean from the desert or the shepherd. You saved me from believing I was nothing. You looked at me and saw a person worth fighting for. That's a gift I can never repay." "Don't need to repay it. Just pass it on. You're already doing that with the children, with every survivor who comes through here." Jack looked at the barn, at the warm light glowing from the windows. "We're building something here. Something that matters. A place where the broken can become whole again." The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and creosote. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called and another answered. The desert night was alive with sound and movement, beautiful in its harshness. Sarah thought about the burlap sack on the fence, about how it would eventually disintegrate, become part of the landscape forgotten. She thought about the shepherd somewhere out there in hiding, his power broken, his kingdom fallen. She thought about Emma and Martha and all the others who hadn't survived, whose names were scratched on underground walls, whose stories would be told and remembered. And she thought about tomorrow, about teaching Hope to read, about helping Thomas with the horses, about planning with Rachel for her future as a marshal, about all the ordinary, beautiful, mundane tasks that made up a life worth living. The shepherd once told me I was cursed, Sarah said quietly, that I brought misfortune to everyone I touched, that I was marked by darkness and would die alone and unmourned. He was wrong. He was. Because look what I brought instead. I brought people together. I brought justice. I brought change. Sarah turned to Jack, her eyes bright in the starlight. I brought hope to the hopeless and home to the lost. If that's a curse, then I'll wear it gladly. Jack raised his coffee cup. To curses, then, and to breaking them. Sarah clinked her cup against his. To breaking them, and to building something better in their place. They stood together in comfortable silence, two survivors who'd found each other at the end of the world and discovered it was actually a beginning. The ranch stretched out around them, no longer a place of isolation and grief, but a haven of healing and hope. In the barn, the children slept, some peacefully, some fighting nightmares, but all of them safe. In the bunkhouse, the older survivors rested, planning their futures, daring to dream again. And in the house, Jack and Sarah kept watch, guardians of this fragile new thing they'd built from pain and determination and the simple refusal to let cruelty have the final word. The desert wind carried the burlap sack away sometime in the night, tumbling it across the sand and rock until it caught on a Joshua tree miles away, where it would slowly disintegrate under the relentless sun. Sarah never saw it go, never knew exactly when the physical symbol of her captivity disappeared. But she felt the lightness of letting go, of releasing the past to make room for the future. And when morning came, bringing with it the promise of another day, another chance, another moment of choosing hope over despair, she was ready. They all were. The shepherd's reign was over. The curse was broken. And in its place, something beautiful had grown, a community of survivors who'd learned that the opposite of cruelty wasn't just kindness, but family. The opposite of darkness wasn't just light, but love. The opposite of being broken wasn't being perfect, but being brave enough to heal. And in a small ranch in the Mojave Desert, under the vast western sky, that healing continued one day, one choice, one act of courage at a time.